zeros and ones will get seriously. Thank you. Even the distinction between 0 and 1 may be blurred because of noise. So we have no choice but to study noise seriously. The power levels that we have been talking about are all average powers, whether it's noise power or signal power. We are averaging out over the time period of the signal. The formula for noise power, thermal noise power, is shown here. I have already given it to you. Here, he's putting an extra suffix P on the left-hand side. Okay. And Boltzmann constant, he is giving it a suffix with capital B. Fine. But the formula is essentially what I have been telling you. The noise power, of course, will be measured in watts if we use this equation. You have to convert the result in dBm, dBW, etc. if necessary. The basic idea is that you want signal power to be high enough compared to the noise power. SNR has to be high enough. SNR is a function of frequency. I forgot to mention that. It is average signal power divided by average noise power. We have done that in the previous lecture. Noise figure is the measurement done to figure out how seriously a given component is degrading the SNR from input to output. Noise factor is what I'm defining as SNR at the input divided by SNR at the output. And if you take tan log of that, then it becomes noise figure. Some people want to call everything noise figure. Fine, that's okay. As long as you know what you're doing, it's fine. Okay. Noise factor is always greater than 1, and noise figure is always greater than 0 dB. Yeah, actually, he's also doing exactly what I'm doing. He is defining noise figure as tan log of noise factor, which is good. Okay. If the signal to noise ratio at the input of a component is 40 dB and that at the output is 30 dB, noise figure is simply 40 minus 30 dB, which is 10 dB. Noise temperature, I'll also show you my own document on this. It is another way of measuring noise. I'll come to details later, but at least see the equation. If you know the noise figure of a component, the noise temperature can be calculated by using this equation. Noise factor minus 1 multiplied by a standard temperature, which is defined universally as 290 Kelvin, which is essentially 17 degrees Celsius. That's what they say room temperature is approximately equal to, especially if you are working with air-conditioned environment. So industry typically does most of the noise measurements and gives you data at 290 K. You have to keep that factor in mind. And this is the summary. Noise figure and noise temperature both are equally popular when it comes to quantifying noise. Okay, so it's a small document. Let me close it and show you another one. It has slightly more info compared to the previous one, but first slide is almost identical to what it was in the previous slide. Here, the author is talking about sources also. I also tried to explain it to you that noise is contributed externally or internally. Okay. Internal noise, of course, is that generated in registers, transistors, etc. Mixers, when they do mixing, they generate their own noise. Cross-coupling noise, it's basically, if it's a complicated system, noise from one part of the system can generate noise in the other part of the system. Power supply that you are using to convert AC into DC at high frequencies, it also generates a noise. If the input is high frequency and output is DC, there may be cross-coupling to generate power supply noise also. Dynamic range, of course, I told you last time, it is the safe range of input or output so that you are able to process the signal effectively. Signal to noise ratio is the best method of quantifying noisiness. Noise by nature is supposed to be random. Other kinds of undesirable inputs are, of course, interference, and there are distortions which are actually produced in the output of most components, if non-linearity. Receivers, internal noise, thermal, flicker, short, these three for sure. And I gave you some other possibilities also in my document. External noise that is added from the antennas is, of course, atmospheric noise and global, in fact, galactical phenomena can also contribute to that. Not all the time, but often. This diagram, you don't have to look at it too much. It essentially gives you practical information about how serious the noise is, noise being added by sky. Sky means atmosphere versus, I know you cannot see it probably, but don't worry too much. The important thing is that we have a lot of major data for calculating the noise temperature versus frequency or wavelength. A lot of practically known phenomena are captured in this graph. Okay, so it's for your reference for future in case you are more interested in these kind of things. Noise factor, we have already gone through it, so let's forget it. Sensitivity is another word which I forgot to mention. It is the minimum detectable input signal for a given output SNR. And sensitivity is very close to noise floor. Slightly above that will be nice. Dynamic range, we have already gone through it, so let's move forward. This equation we have been using in solving problems. If you have a chain of components and you have gains and powers in dBs, then it's simply addition and subtraction that gives you the final gain or final power. Here they are saying if you have a transmitter transmitting PTX power in say dBm, he is writing dB, but let's say dBm, that's a better word, plus gain of the transmit antenna in dB will give you the total power going out. It is called effective isotropic radiated power, but don't worry too much about that. Next semester when you do antenna engineering course, this will all be brought back to your attention anyway. Then on the receiving side, there will be gain of the receive antenna, and in between there will be a lot of loss because of the medium, which is being captured by factor called L, loss in dB. And there may be miscellaneous losses also, especially in when you are transmitting signal in crowded environment, there's a lot of things present that introduce extra loss. Buildings, trees, even raindrops, they produce extra loss. So all that is probably being covered by introducing an extra term, miscellaneous. Okay, this I'm going to ignore. You don't have to worry too much about it. So this was the second document that I wanted to show you. Now, let me move back to my own document. I'll straight away go to my second document, which has quite a bit of discussion on noise temperature. It is generally denoted by T with the suffix small e. Small e means effective. Generally, we drop the word effective when we talk about noise temperature. It is not a physical temperature, keep in mind, but indirectly it is related to a physical temperature. Basically, think of a case where you have a practical amplifier which is noisy, and at the input you connect a resistance of value capital R operating at 0 Kelvin. And at the output also you connect another resistance of the same value, let's say. And let's say the gain of the amplifier is small g, bandwidth is capital B, etc. The resistance is often used as a noise source. Resistance operating at various temperatures generates a very good, becomes a very good source of noise for practical measurements. If you are by chance cooling that resistor down to 0 Kelvin, then it will produce no noise across its output terminals, and Ni would be 0. But even if that is happening, the amplifier itself will produce some internal noise, so the output noise or output power will still not be 0. This is what I'm showing here. It's a noisy amplifier with input connected to a resistor R, which has a temperature 0 Kelvin. So input noise power is 0. There's no desired signal right now. It's all noisy, noise input, noise output type of situation right now. At the output, N0 would still not be 0 because amplifier itself is not at 0 Kelvin, that's for sure. So it will produce some noise which will be added, and NO will be non-zero. Now suppose you try to simulate this using a noiseless amplifier. Then in theory, in fact, since we are simulating this entire operation by using a noiseless amplifier, no noise will be added by the amplifier in part B. In that case, suppose you still want the same N naught, which was happening in part A, then what should be the temperature of the input resistor R so that you get the same output noise power? That temperature is known as noise temperature of the amplifier. That is the definition. Suppose N naught is known, you simply divide it by G, K, and B, you get the noise temperature of the amplifier. Because if you take Ts equal to N naught divided by GKB, then multiply it by KB, you will get NO upon G. And that NO upon G, when going through the noiseless amplifier, will generate NO. Simple mathematics. So noise temperature of the amplifier is, practically speaking, even if you forget the definition, practically speaking, what you do is you take the noise output power when input has no noise input, when input noise is 0, when whatever output noise is coming out, you divide that by GkB. You simply get the noise temperature of the amplifier. This applies to all components, not only amplifiers. Even components other than amplifiers can also be characterized using this technique. Whatever I have said is written here in the document. Now there is a famous formula which we saw in the previous PPT. This formula connects noise factor with noise temperature. The derivation is, I think, reasonably simple. You take an amplifier with gain G. Si is the input desired power, So is the output desired power, Ni is the input noise power, and N0 is the output noise power. Now, be careful about one thing, that industry always gives you noise figure data by doing testing at a standard temperature 290 Kelvin. Input noise is supposed to be fed at 290 K. So that has to be factored in situations where the system that you are looking at has input noise at some other temperature. It's a subtle point, but worth being aware of. So let's put it this way. Ni is KT naught B. I'm writing T naught deliberately. T naught is 290 K. This is how industry measures noise performance of all components. TO is 290 K, universally accepted standard. NO obviously will be Ni multiplied by G plus the internal noise added by the amplifier, which can simply be written as GkBTE, where TE is the noise temperature of the amplifier. So you simplify that, you get equation 21. GkB comes out within the brackets, you will get T naught plus TE. This is the value of N naught. Now, SO, of course, is G times Si, simple. So noise factor, which is SNR at the input divided by SNR at the output, becomes 1 upon G multiplied by NO upon Ni. You use the formula for NO here. Put the formula for Ni also, KTOB. Simplify, you get F equal to 1 plus TE divided by TO. Okay. So the noise temperature is related to noise factor by equation 24. Equation 23 is the alternate way of saying the same thing. Now, the problem that we were trying to solve at the end of the previous lecture, there was a second part, and I have shown the solution in that handout. But that does not give you correct answer. To calculate noise power, if you go back to the previous problem, there was some input noise power given to that. There were three components in that chain. There was, I think, a mixer, and before that a filter, and after that also I've forgotten, but there were three components, and we had figured out the total noise figure, overall noise figure, in fact overall noise factor around 1.8, and the gain I think was 6 dB as far as I remember. So all those things can be taken here also, but in the second part your objective was to figure out the output noise power. For that, the correct method is you calculate TE first. TE is F minus 1 multiplied by T naught. So F overall is 1.8. We calculated that last time in that problem. So 1.80 minus 1 multiplied by 290. That gives you, I think, 232 K. Overall gain is 6 dB. That converted to absolute scale is about 3.98. Then we simply use the formula for output power, which is N naught equal to GKB T naught plus TE. This is the correct answer. In the method that I used in the previous handout, basically instead of TA, TO was being put indirectly. Okay. Here, remember, TE plus T naught is the formula that we have got here. But if the input is at a temperature other than T naught, then you use that temperature here. And I think the input noise coming into the system is supposed to be at 150 K. So we put that value here to calculate the overall output power. And this gives us a reasonably accurate answer, slightly, much better than the answer given in the previous problem. This is supposed to be more close to reality, minus 96.78 dBm or something. Okay. And the last problem is this, which I am not solving here, but I think you will be able to do it. Calculate the overall gain and overall noise figure of the chain of 3 cascaded amplifiers shown below. Fairly straightforward. The first amplifier has a gain of 20 dB. The second amplifier has a gain of 10 dB. And the third amplifier has a gain of 5 dB. So the total gain, the overall gain will be 20 dB plus 10 dB plus 5 dB, which is 35 dB. That's straightforward. For doing the other calculation, you will convert all the G values to small g values, all the NF values to F values, and then you will use the well-known formula for the overall noise factor. Try doing it yourself. I think I don't have the answer. I have not solved it yet, but if you have solved it, if you solve it and give me the answer, maybe I'll double check your answer. Okay. So that's about noise as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot more I could have done, but we have to move forward to other things. Now, the next topic is supposed to be transmission lines. But before that, I'd like to reiterate something that you may have been taught, but let me still insist that we go through it once. There is a concept called phasor in electronics engineering. Let's go over it once. What happens is, in all practical cases, the voltage and currents are always in time domain. That is the reality. And you know how to do circuit analysis in time domain very well. It has been taught to you in first year. Problem is, if you have a pure resistor, then it's easy to calculate the time varying current by simply using Ohm's law. If you know the time varying voltage applied across the resistor, you simply divide it by R, that's it. In case of inductor, you use the formula V, small v equal to L di by dt. In case of a capacitor, you use small I equal to C dV by dt. So if you have a series RLC circuit, it is easy enough, reasonably easy to do the analysis purely in time domain and figure out all the answers. However, as circuits become complicated, you will see that time domain analysis starts becoming very cumbersome. The order of differential equation that you have to deal with starts getting larger and larger. It is possible to solve those equations, but an alternate method to tackle large circuit analysis is the use of phasors, where we go back to frequency domain. All the differential equations are gone. Instead, we end up doing algebra involving complex variables. That is what we'll be doing in this course also. By default, in all the derivations that we did for circuit parameters, the voltages and currents were all phasor values. There was no mention about time domain at all. So, but what were we doing? Let me make sure we are on the same page. What is a phasor? It's a mathematical tool, first of all. Suppose you are given a time varying signal, small v, as Vm cos omega t plus theta v. You know that it is called instantaneous value, omega is 2 pi f, etc., etc. And f is 1 upon t, t is the time period. You know all this, okay? Now, there's an identity by Euler. It says e to the power jx equal to cos x plus j sin x. In that identity, if I put x equal to omega t plus theta v, then I get e to the power j omega t plus theta v equal to cos of omega t plus theta v plus j sin of omega t plus theta v. In other words, cos of omega t plus theta v is a real part of e to the power j omega t plus theta v. Okay. It's a mathematical manipulation. So if I take equation 6 and use it in equation 1, the time varying signal now can be written as equation 7. Vm is a constant. It doesn't depend on time, so it is taken within the brackets. This is still time domain, by the way. Equation 7 is still in time domain. Now the phasor is defined at this point by dropping the suffix re. We know it's there, but we drop it. And we also drop out or remove e to the power j omega t. We know it's there. But we write this information contained in equation 7 symbolically as Vm multiplied by e to the power j theta v. That is called the phasor, representation of small v. The phasors are always given capital sign. So the phasor of small v is capital V. It is written either as Vm e to the power j theta v or also Vm with an angle of theta v. You know probably all this, so let's quickly get it over with. Similar analogy applies to currents also. And in this course, similar analogies would apply to electric field and magnetic field also. You have to realize that. You will be dealing with electric field and magnetic field in the time domain as well as in phasor domain. Same analogy would apply there also. Okay. In many books nowadays, when they define phasor, instead of using the peak value of the signal, they use RMS value. Fine. Nothing wrong with it. As long as you know what you're doing, it should be okay. I generally prefer to stick to the peak value. That's the way classically we were all taught. AC current also, standard form is equation 11, and the phasor form will obviously be Im e to the power j theta I. Okay. One important thing that you should be conversant with is how to convert a time domain signal into phasor domain and other way around. I've given some sample examples in this document. I'll send it to you. But let's also look at it for a minute or two. There's a lot of examples here, by the way. We are supposed to convert these time varying signals into phasor domain or into phasor representation. Small v equal to cos omega t. Units are same whether you are in phasor domain or in time domain. So if the given voltage is in volts in time domain, it will continue to be in volts in phasor domain also. In part A, Vm is 1 volt, theta v is 0. So the phasor representation is extremely simple. It is 1 e to the power j0, which is simply 1. You don't even have to bother writing e to the power j0. Part B is where now we have got sin omega t on the right hand side. So you got to convert that into cos of something. And I think sin omega t is cos of omega t minus pi by 2. So here the phasor will be 1 with an angle of minus 90 degrees. And similarly, in part C, Vm is 10 volt and sine omega t is the same as in the previous case. So part C, the answer will be 10 with an angle of minus 90 degrees. You can probably go through the rest of them yourself. For instance, part E, in fact, part D is straightforward. It fits the standard form Vm cos omega t plus theta v. So the answer is 10 with an angle of 45 degrees. Part E is slightly more interesting. Give me a few minutes, we'll be done with this. In part E, the answer turns out to be 10 with an angle of minus 45 degrees. And I have done actual calculations also by putting the rectangular form of the result. Okay. You can probably go through the rest of them yourself. Important thing is that you should be comfortable enough to do convergence from time domain to phasor domain and other way around. Sometimes we will do the analysis in phasor domain, but at the end, you may be asked to convert things back to time domain. That's the way it is. Okay, with this background, I want to move to a very exhaustive topic called transmission lines. Transmission lines are all around us. They carry electromagnetic energy from one point to another, as simple as that. There's a large variety of them. The most common one, of course, is two wires running from one point to another. Then there can be more than two wires also. You see on both sides of the street, at least on one side of all streets, poles carrying wires. And usually they are more than two wires. Those are all transmission lines. Some of them are carrying 50 hertz signal. That means the electric power that we need all the time. Some are carrying telephonic signals. And transmission lines at frequencies higher than 50 hertz or higher than a few megahertz become even more interesting for doing communication system designs. So, show you a small PPT again. Okay, this is the formal definition. In an electronic system, the delivery of power requires the connection of two wires between the source and the load. At low frequencies, power is considered to be delivered to the load through the wire. Power we get in Jaipur is coming most likely from Kota, and it's all coming through transmission lines. Even within Jaipur city, or in any city for that matter, power is being transmitted all over through transmission lines. They are all around us, Within the home also, they are hidden inside the walls. In microwave frequency region, although transmission line concept remains valid, but the analytical treatment becomes a lot more rigorous. Instead of voltage and current, we try to use electric and magnetic field concept. By the way, a transmission line is a two-port network. We will be coming back to that concept later also. Transmission lines with two wires are the most popular ones, but they cannot be used at microwave frequencies. They will radiate too much. And that is what the second slide says here. At low frequencies, I mentioned in my first lecture, the value of wavelength is very large. Most of the components we use have very small dimensions compared to wavelength. So they can be called lumped components. At high frequencies, lambda becomes small. So at 1 gigahertz, lambda is 30 centimeters. At 10 gigahertz, it is only 3 centimeters. So the component size starts becoming comparable to lambda. That is when the components are given the name distributed components. Their properties depend on where you are looking in the component. This is what this slide is telling you. We will come to theory of transmission lines later, but be aware that transmission line, at least in principle, is a distributed component. Its properties depend on where you are looking along the length of the line. Types of transmission lines. The most common one, of course, is two-wire line. The second most common one is the coaxial cable. This is the cable you were using in first year lab to carry output of the function generator to the CRO. On top of it, there are other ones also, which are part of CIF in this course. Waveguides. These are hollow pieces of metal that carry very high frequency signal from one point to another. Planar transmission lines are a mixture of copper and dielectric. That will be taught to you at the end of the course. Most likely, I'll be taking this part for sure. Okay. But planar transmission lines essentially are very compact. They are the concept of integrated circuits used at microwave frequencies. Theory is not too different, but the implementation is very different. Planar transmission lines are very compact compared to cables, two-wire lines, etc. And at high frequencies, they give lot more reliable designs. There's a large number of names here. Don't worry too much about them today. Okay. Here's one example. Coaxial cable is shown on the left-hand side. Essentially, it has two conductors. One is the outer conductor, the other one is the inner conductor. They are both concentric. That means the center of these two circles is the same. The central conductor generally is solid or semi-solid. It comes out. The outer conductor, for practical purposes, to make the entire assembly light, the outer conductor can sometimes be made of thin wire, which is braided. It may not be a solid conductor, or sometimes it may be a solid conductor also. It all depends. Depends on the application for which you are designing the cable. But central conductor carries the signal. The outer conductor is normally grounded for coaxial line. Two-wire line, of course, there's one example shown here. Two wires coming out. But at the input, you have got coaxial cable. And out at the output, you have got two wires coming out. Adapters from one kind of transmission line to another are available. And in this course, it may not be possible to look at adapters seriously, but be aware that we frequently need to go from one kind of transmission line to another, and suitable adaptation mechanisms have to be evolved. In the next semester, there is a lab called Microwave Lab, where you will actually see quite a few transmission lines in practice. You will be doing experiments. I'm hoping that by then, you will all be able to come back to campus and see things with your eyes rather than through videos. But let's see. Microwave Lab is where you will do at least 7 or 8 experiments, including transmission lines, including a lot of measurements, etc., etc. Okay. So let me stop this one here. I think for today, I think I'm by and large done. Yeah, this is done, this is done. Now, from the next lecture onwards, I'll begin this document, which, wait, just a minute.
Okay.
I'm not going to go too far in this document, only the first page today, which is something that you know well. Transmission lines are, in principle, distributed components. That means along the length of the line, the properties might change. And the basic definition that I told you about is being repeated in this first page. Lumped versus distributed. Now, how do you analyze a transmission line? Forget electric field and magnetic field. Let's talk about voltage and current. Even voltage and current will have different behavior along the length of the line. The concept that was brought in was that suppose it's a very long transmission line you break it up into several, in fact, into a large number of small sections. Each section, at least one of the typical sections, should be analyzed on its own using Kirchhoff's current law and Kirchhoff's voltage law. And then from there, you integrate the result to get the overall behavior. This is a very approximate approach, but it works reasonably well. Without getting too deep into solving electromagnetic, using Maxwell's equations, etc., which is also possible. One conventional approach to handle transmission lines is to continue using voltage and current concept. And later, when we go to much higher frequencies, it is possible to relate the electric and magnetic fields to voltage and current.
Sir, can you rotate the screen?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank
What
you.
happens is transmission lines essentially at low frequencies can still be handled using voltage and currents. Okay. As frequencies go higher and higher, we have no choice but to use electric field and magnetic field concept, which will be done in this course. And it is possible from electric field concept to always go back to voltage, because integration of E field over a linear path gives you voltage. And using magnetic field, that means, you may remember a quantity called H, which has got units amperes per meter. Using Ampere's law, that can, in fact, using Ampere's law, if you know the current density, it can be integrated over a surface to get the total current. We will be dealing with that later on. But important thing is that in this document, which I'm going to show you for the next 3-4 lectures, we would avoid talking electric field and magnetic field. Instead, we will be talking about circuit theory approach as if we can do everything using voltage and current.